Hey everyone, if you're joining us, hopping on, we're gonna wait a little bit just to give some time for folks to join us during this lunch hour. Really appreciate UDW, Kim Moore, and Dr. Reed to be joining us on this very important conversation. So we'll give it another 15, 20 seconds, and then we'll just dive in and hopefully provide some entertainment for your lunch hour, or if you're not having lunch, it's later in the day maybe for you, or earlier, whatever you're doing, we'll provide some good conversation. So thanks for being here, and we'll get started in a few seconds. Dr. Reed, Kim, you all good? Ready to get going? Awesome. Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining us today on our Labor for Progress, Not Prisons. This is a very important conversation, and a conversation I am personally excited for. UDW was an organization that immediately jumped to the forefront of my mind when I was thinking about organizations we should partner with on this public education campaign, because of what they stand for and who they represent, and who the voices that they speak for. And so I'm really excited that you all are joining us here today. We're gonna start with some introductions, and then I'll do a quick overview for those that don't know what this public education campaign is, and then we'll dive right into the conversation and the questions. So really quick, my name is Anthony DiMartino. I'm the Government Affairs Director for Californians for Safety and Justice, based in Sacramento, California, working on policy and budget in Sacramento here at the state capitol, really focusing on how do we provide services for victims of violence, survivors of violent crimes, and crime in general. How do we remove barriers for formerly incarcerated folks? And then how are we reimagining what safety and health and wellness looks like in our communities? So that's a little bit about myself and the organization, but really want to make sure we have plenty of time for UDW and them to speak on their perspectives on this issue. But I want to start with introductions. So Dr. Reed, please feel free to introduce yourself and introduce UDW and the great work that you all do.
Sure. My name is William Reed. I'm the District Vice President for United Domestic Workers, as well as the Chapter Chair for District 6 here in Northern California. My area covers 7 counties within that district. I'm a home care provider, and I sit on the executive board.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Reed, for joining us. Kim, really excited that, Dr. Reed's here and getting to meet Dr. Reed, but Kim and I have, I think, a special bond. Anyone that worked on AB 392 from a few years ago, especially does. So thanks, Kim, for joining us, and please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more what we need to know about UDW.
My name is Kim Moore. I'm the Special Assistant to the Executive Director here at UDW, and I do all of our social and racial justice work and training our members so that our members can lead those efforts. And that also includes legislation, which Anthony kind of hinted at. We were co-sponsors of the ever controversial but much needed AB 392 bill last year that passed and was signed into law, limiting the use of excessive force. So we are a union that believes heavily in social justice. And while we do have our bread and butter issues, with IHSS, the In-Home Support Services Program, which William will speak to later on, we also know that our members, beyond just being home care providers, are still facing other things, when they step out into the world, because they step out with varying identities, and they live. Some of our members live in communities that have been divested from historically. Some are living in communities that have been over policed, and where they've seen a lot of their community members end up incarcerated and not having access to things that would keep them safe, right? And so I know that you talked a little bit, Anthony, just a second ago about imagining what safety looks like. And so I'm so excited for this conversation and to dive in so that we can start talking about what that looks like, even among our home care members, but the broader community as well across the state.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Dr. Reed, for joining us and for introducing yourselves. I'm really curious, you kind of hinted both at it a little bit, for those that are watching, you may or may not be familiar with, how much the labor movement has played a role in not just advocating for workers' rights, which, are human rights, but other social justice issues and rights, and understanding, right, who tends to make up the labor unions and labor workforce. So I'm wondering, though, personally, if you could both share a little bit more about, what brought you into this work, and then what keeps you here as well, especially right now with what's going on with COVID. And I know your workers all being deemed essential workers. Really, I think it would be helpful for those tuning in and for myself, my education, to hear a little bit more about, what brought you here. Why do you do this work? Dr. Reed, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, to understand why I do this work, you have to look through a lens of yesterday as opposed to today, would bring you forth. Growing up in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, as a Black man, this work came to me. I did not necessarily come to it. My uncle, whom I care for, I've been working with people with disabilities for all of my life. My uncle was a disabled person as a result of drug experimentation that was forced on him. And that started me down the path. As a psychologist, I chose the profession so I can understand people's behavior and why things the way they are. I also have the privilege of having a disabled son. And that's kind of ties me into United Domestic Workers and home support care services. It makes you realize the importance of where we live, how we live, and whom we care for. All the things that we think about today, whether it's criminal justice or the economical situation that we face with, started back years ago with the exclusion of many people of color. And that brought us forth to today. So I got into this work because I wanted to make sure that I was a contributor, making sure that I could do things that help other people overcome, that I can show that the greatness of this company starts with human rights and civil rights for every person who lives within. To look at the criminal justice system and see the danger and damages that it has done to many people, because we need a change, and we have not made that change over the years. We started in the direction many times that, in my opinion, we do not complete the journey. I'm here today to hopefully that we will complete that journey.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing and being honest and open and vulnerable with us about that already, Dr. Reed. Really appreciate that. I knew coming into this conversation that we were going to be touching on, some very serious and important conversations. And something I know I can relate to is the responsibility to this issue, to this movement, right? That we're living in a lot of moments that are hopefully, like you said, we turn into movements that finish the cycle, right? And make sure that we really do solve these issues. And so thank you so much for the work that you're doing and for sharing with us today. Kim, would love to hear a little bit more about what brought you to this work and what keeps you here.
Yeah, definitely. And William, that was really beautiful. So I got my start grassroots organizing 15 years ago. And what brought me into justice work was the loss of so many friends after I graduated high school from gang violence. And so I thought naturally, like, oh, that's what the issue is. And that's where I need to start, is working around gang violence and digging into prevention and intervention. But as I continued to dig more into that work, I started to understand that, oh, this wasn't about gang violence. Like, that wasn't where my work needed to be focused. It was about, I came to understand that was a symptom. I needed to find out what the root cause was. And over time, just studying and consistently investing in educating myself via, reading and researching, I came to learn that this was a poverty issue. This was about poverty and the fact that this nation not only legislates poverty, but it manufactures poverty. And we need to get to the root of that to address all of these other issues, because anywhere poverty exists and persists, there's always going to be violence. So I needed to cut out, chopping at symptoms and really get to the root. And when I did that, that constantly led me to dig deeper and to go further. And I ventured many ways throughout my time as an organizer, and ended up, with UDW in the last 6 years, doing, labor organizing and work in the labor movement. And this has been extremely meaningful because the history of labor, right? It has its roots in anti-Blackness as well. in racism as well. We've seen that play out with who was allowed to have unions, who was allowed to be a part of, unions, who could be union members. And even with our own UDW, our home care workers, that domestic workers have historically been cut out of legislation that would have protected them, right? We saw that with the FLSA, with Federal Labor Standards Act, and that is specifically tied to, Black people and people of color being domestic workers historically over time, and wanting to, those in power wanting to ensure that they could not have access to or receive benefits or protections as workers. So all of it ties in together when you think about and consider the larger picture. And that's why I'm here, because one, I want to help others connect the dots. But two, I want to see more people lead the same way that my mentor helped push me and propel me into this work. I want to do that for our other members so that they can also help other members lead as well. And that they can be, leaders in their communities too, not just our unions, right? But also lead these issues in their communities.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, so many different directions, and I think ways we could go with what both of you just shared. And I think, this is why I was excited for this conversation, is because, yeah, you all are a labor union, but you all are leaders. You're willing to stand up for all of these different issues, because you recognize, one, that, I think the interconnectedness of all of our humanity is tied up. And then something you said about poverty, right? It made me think about a Brian Stevenson quote, one of my favorite authors, and advocates in the space, the author Just Mercy. He says the opposite of poverty is not wealth. In too many places, the opposite of poverty is justice, right? And that's really, I think, what we're all asking for and looking for. We're not asking for more than anyone else. We're asking for justice and equity. And so, really appreciate just the work that you all are doing, and the work the union's doing. And I think, that brings me to kind of like my next big kind of question topic is just like, what are the connections that you all, are seeing between, your work and Progress Not Prisons? And actually, you know what? I realized I did it again, y'all. I didn't actually talk about what the Progress Not Prisons campaign is. I just dove right into the conversation and having you all share. So really quick, for those that are joining us and aren't familiar, I know we've had a couple of these conversations now in past weeks, but Progress Not Prisons is the public education campaign to really bring to light how the state of California spends $50 billion local, county, and at the state level on our criminal justice system. So this is police, court system, and incarceration, right? And, thinking about, I think, tying it directly to the labor movement, like how we lock folks out after them having been touched by the criminal justice system, right? I know we have over 400 something barriers in the state to folks to getting employment if they have a former criminal record. So, really quick, that's what the Progress Not Prisons, we're having this conversation to highlight really the interconnection of all these different issues, and specifically today labor, and how there's these connections with the criminal justice system. So sorry, y'all, I did it again. I was too excited to talk about UDW and their amazing work. But yeah, so now that I did that, would love to hear from Dr. Reed and Kim to talk a little bit more about the connections between the Progress Not Prisons and the criminal justice system and the reform movement and the work that you all are doing. So Dr. Reed, would you like to start?
Sure. We're talking about poverty and economics. That really is what it's about. And when you take that money away and out of our communities, everyone feels the pain. When IHSS, we do some of the most heart-saving work that you can imagine. We do work that nurses do. We do the work that social workers do. We do all of the work that other people do, but we do it at a lower wage. We do it without benefits. Think about the fact that many of our people work in communities that they can't afford to live in. Think about the fact that we don't have good transportation to get to those jobs from our communities. Think about the fact that we have to spend the money we get outside of our communities, which is taking wealth out of our communities and putting it someplace else. You look at all of those things, and it brings back to a core that it is detrimental to our health, our human rights, to work without a livable wage, to work in a community that does not serve us. And that's across the line. So the connection is very much there. You have to understand it in order to be able to see it. Because if you look around, it may not be apparent, but you have to be there to understand it. You have to be there to know that people who are working deserve wages, benefits, and they also deserve a life after work. So you're tied into, and I give you an example. There's a lady in my area. She's 70 years old, and she came to me. She says, I can't be a provider anymore. She says, it's too heartfelt. I've lost too many candidates. They died and so forth. She says, but I'm afraid to retire because I can't afford to retire. I can't. She's worked all these years, and now she must continue working because she cannot afford to retire. That hurts the community. And the other thing is our community is kind of a melting pot for every bad thing that happens. And the reason it's there is because we live in an area that nobody else wants, nobody wants to invest in. So when they release criminals from prison, where do they go? They go back to our neighborhoods. And there's not enough funds, opportunities within that neighborhood to keep people adjusted so they can grow beyond, so they can mature. Whether it's the schools, whether it's the environment, all of that plays a heck of a part to people in our community, especially those who work for a minimum wage. And that's devastating to us all.
Yeah, before Kim, you hop in with some thoughts. I think a through line too that I'm hearing really underlying all of this is the human dignity factor, right? Like the workers' dignity and the individuals the workers serve, their dignity, right? It seems like that is not being appreciated and not being uplifted, right? And I know that's a lot of the work that you all do. I mean, and it's similar in the criminal justice space, right? Survivors of crime are tokenized too often. Certain survivors of crime, I'm just going to name it, Black and brown men and women generally, and lower income folks, they are not, their dignity is not restored by the criminal justice system, right? The criminal justice system being punitive does not uplift anyone's dignity, right? And so what I'm hearing and seeing from what you're sharing, Dr. Reed, and what I know of, the livable wage movement, right, and just the labor movement in general, is really the dignity of these workers. And then the lack of dignity as well for folks that are touched by the criminal justice system, right? And what does that do? You're a psychologist, so you can speak on this even more. But what does that do, right, to the mental psyche and the understanding of worthiness, right? Would love for you, Dr. Reed, to chime in about that if you have any thoughts. But also, Kim, feel free to hop in here. But that was just like a through line that I was hearing what you were just sharing right now, Dr. Reed.
Yes, of course, it breaks the spirit of an individual. Without hope, we're all lost. And when you funnel back into a community that society itself has withdrawn all of their support for, the people in that community kind of adopts that same feeling. They feel lost. They feel hopeless. And once you feel hopeless, you feel that you have nothing to offer. But we know the exact opposite is true. Just because you've been incarcerated doesn't mean that your life ends. Just because you've been incarcerated doesn't mean that you can't take a step higher and move on. But without the resources, there's nothing for you to do. And believe me, it pays a tremendous impact on the psyche. It plays a mental impact on one's ability to overcome. And that's why injustice is so cruel, because it has a lasting effect. And it's not only the physical part, but definitely it's the mental part. And that is most disruptive and most difficult to overcome.
Yeah. And I mean, what we know about the brain science too is the manifestation of traumas and injustice from the emotional and mental side will affect the physical side as well. And I think that speaks to just the resiliency and the true heart work that you all are doing, right? To continue to fight and to speak up on these issues while working and maintaining a job that isn't paying you what you deserve and what you're worth, and thinking of your long-term health as well. So thank you for sharing that, Dr. Reed. I want to see if Kim, if you have anything you want to chime in or add to this specific topic or conversation.
Yeah, I was just going to add the connection that I see, the very visible connection I see between the campaign for Progress Not Prisons and the work that we do is really looking at, I mean, the whole of your campaign is about divestment, right? Like that's one of the keys. We need to divest from mass incarceration, and we need to reinvest into people, into communities. And so the way I look at it is like this. What could happen if we divested from mass incarceration, right? And invested in people? And let's just consider our sector, for UDW and our members. So many aging individuals are sent to nursing homes. And we've heard about what happens to folks in nursing homes. Not everyone, but I mean, we've seen reports over the years of, folks in there die alone. They are abused and grossly mistreated. There's no real humanity there, right? But yet we have home care workers who are doing God's work, who are caring for the most vulnerable in our state. But how can we increase the number of home care workers if the incentive is not there? The wages are not what they should be because home care workers are not valued the way that they should be, right? But I look at this from, if we divested from all of these things that are harmful to us and reinvested into people, reinvested into wages to pay working people, because all labor is skilled labor. I don't believe I divest from the unskilled labor conversation. All labor is skilled labor, right? If we put that money to paying people who care for our most vulnerable, our workforce would look so much different. And it would be full. There would be so many more people to provide care because we are an aging society. So many folks are aging. We're not going to have the number of people we need to care for those folks. And rightfully so at this point, because what incentive is there for them? Why should people work to make poverty wages? That's not right. And no one working full time should be in poverty. But yet, because the way that this nation is constructed, because the way our state is constructed, and because we have invested so much more into building prisons and then invested money into making sure that those prisons stay full, we leave people like home care workers out to fend for themselves. And that's not right. And so that's why I believe in and appreciate this campaign so much, because it speaks to so many issues. Our communities need more to be safe. And workers need more. And that includes home care workers, because everyone working should have access to benefits, should have free health care, and they should be taken care of, and they should be able to provide for their families without having to end their workday at the end of each day and worry about if they can stay in their home the next month, right? And worry about if they can keep their lights on. That should not be a reality, not in this nation, not in this state.
I mean, drop the mic. We could end right there. I think that we could end right there. We're not going to, but I'm not going to say anything else other than I completely agree. I think you both have kind of led me into a thing that I would like you all to touch on. We're obviously still living with COVID-19 and maybe living with COVID-19 for a long more time still. Hoping that a vaccine comes through, but this is the reality right now that we're living in. And so I'm wondering, you all have talked about the lack of a livable wage, lack of resources and benefits. Can you all talk a little bit more, I guess, directly about, especially maybe COVID's brought up, gaps in services, gaps in resources that you all have seen, and like what are some like really important needs right now for your workers?
Sure. To start with is manpower. As we said earlier, when you pay people low wages, you have a tremendous turnover in our profession, and that turnover is more costly to the program. But the other gaps we see is we're called essential workers, right? We have to be there online, but yet and still they do not provide us with the protective equipment we need. We were the first one who needed masks and gowns and hand sanitizer, things of that nature. But we was the last to get it. And other people got it first. And I think it reflects back upon people do not appreciate or do not value the work of the home care provider. And we see that. And that is construed in everything we do and how we do it. So the important thing for us to understand right now is that there's a tremendous gap in just the appreciation for the work we do and understanding. So you put all those three things together: the lack of stable workforce and a lack of appreciation for that workforce, which means the lack of protective equipment, as well as the lack of security for the workers. And the security is healthcare. My goodness, we work with people with the COVID virus, and yet many of our members don't have insurance if they get sick. So that's a tremendous blow. So yeah, at the end of the day, you ask, why do I want to become a home care worker when I'm working for lower wages? I work in a profession that people do not appreciate, and yet I do not get all the benefits that I need in order to prepare me for the time when I may get sick.
Can I have food for another person?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is why we need progress, not prisons. This is why we need, reinvestment in our workers. And, and I think this is why this conversation is just important because, I'll be honest, just a couple of years ago, I knew about in-home supportive services, but I didn't really know about it, right? And I went to grad school and got a social work degree, right? And so I didn't really know about like the work and the opportunities in this field. And so, and I feel like I should have known, I should have learned about that in school. And so, I'm really hoping that just a bunch of the folks that are tuning in for us today and we'll see clips of this on Twitter and social media, they're just learning about this movement and finding out ways, and we can talk a little bit more maybe towards the end on how to get involved. But, just appreciation of the work, the hard work is so important. And then that needs to be reflected in our policies and it needs to be reflected in our budgets. And it's too often it hasn't been. Kim, is there anything you wanted to share around other gaps or resources that are needed that you could definitely see be used if we were talking about reallocation of funds?
Definitely. I think the PPE is a huge thing, but I think also like recruitment, right? For more people to become home care providers. But I mean, William already hinted on it, like what incentive is there, right? And I kind of talked about that earlier too. But we do this very interesting thing in our state, and I've seen it happen across the nation. We will say things like we care about people with disabilities, or we care about people with chronic illnesses, or we care about folks who are aging and elderly. But we say it, but there's no real action or meaning behind it, right? We just say these things because they sound nice. But if that were true, if that were really true in our nation, in this state specifically, we would value home care workers on a regular basis instead of viewing them as glorified babysitters, because babysitters, they are not. They are doing backbreaking work. They're doing the work, like William said, of nurses without the qualifications. They're ensuring that your loved ones can stay home and live with dignity, even in their last days. I mean, that's soul work. Right? You have to truly care about humans and in order to want to do that type of work. And we are caring for people with disabilities, and that work is not easy. And people, I mean, there's an intersection even there when we talk about like incarceration and disabilities too, right? And I won't dive off into that today, but I just want to say, like, if we're going to talk about caring for these folks and treating them with dignity, then we have to care for and treat with dignity the people who are caring for them. And that is a huge gap. There's a disconnect there. We want to highlight the people who need these services, but we don't want to talk about the people providing the services. And we want to erase them from their own work. And we cannot do that. So even earlier this year, when that happened, home care workers being designated as essential workers, they said that, and that was great. But then it was like, well, how are we supposed to protect ourselves so that we can still care for other people? And that way, when we go home, we're still protecting our families because we were protected on the job, right? But that wasn't happening. So there's this disconnect where we want to talk about all of these things and talk about how we're going to care for the most vulnerable in our state, but we're not connecting that with somebody has to do that job. Somebody's doing that work, and that is labor, and they need to be compensated for it in every way, not just monetarily with wages, but also, again, with benefits, ensuring that home care workers can also live their full lives and not have to worry about, can they afford housing, and will another member of their family have to work 2 jobs to, compensate for what they don't make, working as a home care worker. These are things that should not be conversations in our state, but unfortunately there are. And so that's why, a divestment, a movement to divest from something which is incarceration, that we have overly invested in, is huge and so critical, because it's going to provide safety for folks in different ways, but it could also open up the doors for us to pivot and reimagine how we value people in this nation and who we value. And the last thing I will add, I know I've talked a lot on this one, but I do want to add this, is that we need to rethink crime. That is a huge thing for me. It's something I talk often about with communities and people, because what we also don't understand is that we criminalize poverty. We criminalize it. And some people are in prisons because they committed needs-based crimes. And that should not be a thing. We have read stories about women who have been incarcerated for stealing diapers for their children, right? Like, these are unmet needs, but instead we're calling them crimes. And we need to reassess. We need to reconsider that. Less people would be in prison if we met their basic needs. And so again, I want to keep bringing it full circle. That is also what home care is about. Home care workers are meeting the basic needs of the folks that they are caring for, but home care workers also need to have their basic needs met. And a divest, reinvest strategy campaign would, I believe, work to do that.
Yeah, wow. I mean, I think, talking about criminalizing poverty also, I think, connected, that's been on my mind, is always kind of on my mind doing this work. But recently, I read an article last week around abuses of individuals that are incarcerated with disabilities, right? And too often, I think we've criminalized individuals with disabilities. We've criminalized mental health struggles, right? And so, that all speaks to the investments for those services, for those individuals, have gone to a system that's punitive, that is harmful, and has not been reinvested in the heart work, the soul work that you all are talking about, the educational work, right? Or even just showing care for certain communities and investing in those communities, like Dr. Reed alluded to earlier, right? So, I think we have criminalized, Kim, like, to your point, poverty, disabilities, and mental health, instead of really thinking about the services that these folks need, and putting the resources there, which, everything that I've ever read is the research shows, if you do the preventative allocations and investments, you are not going to have to spend much money on the back end, right? It is going to save you money, and I don't like talking about it that way, but if I'm going to just be truthful about it, like, we are going to save money overall if you invest in the work that you all are doing in educational work, right, and in communities, than what we're doing on the back end. So, those are some things that kind of top of mind that come to my mind. But I really did want to share, just so folks know, the first time ever prison guards are going to have to wear body cameras at the Donovan facility down in San Diego, actually, because a court ruling found that there were abuses of individuals that have disabilities, excessive use of force on them, unnecessary force. And so the first time ever in the state, prison guards are going to have to wear body cameras only when interacting with individuals that have disabilities that are incarcerated. But later, I think in October, there's going to be a ruling on whether all across the state, prison guards are going to have to wear body cameras. So, just thinking about, like, the idea that we talk about protecting and valuing individuals with disabilities, but I don't even think we're doing that. We're doing the bare minimum for some of these folks, right? And that then speaks to where our policies and our budget values are. So those are some things at the top of my mind. I think, wondering if Dr. Reed, if you have anything else you want to share on this before I want to highlight some of the great work that UDW is doing in policy advocacy. But this is we kind of hit on some of the big topics already, but would love to hear if Dr. Reed or Kim, you have anything else before I want to shift us a little bit to some of the policy work you all do.
Well, I think we covered a lot of it. I just want to reemphasize the fact, we say this is God's work, and it is His work. But I think God wants us to do this work. But He also wants us to be paid for fairly and paid with benefits and be recognized for the work we do. As this population gets older, we all are going to need someone to care for us. And yet and still, we have to look at the fact that we must invest in our communities, must invest in home care workers and other workers, what we consider low-wage workers. I don't like the term low-wage workers. Why? Because the work we do, you can't get someone to do it properly for low wages. We deserve better. And the thing about it, it benefits everyone. I mean, we come into your home and we have total access to your home. Wouldn't you want a quality person to do that? And a person whom you could trust, and a person who cares for you, and a person who's not there just for the dollar, but there to make sure that people can live their life with dignity and respect.
Yeah, I appreciate that so much. I think something that I was like, am I going to go here or not? I'm going to go here. And I should preface this right with, I'm not an expert on any one thing. I think I know a little bit about a lot of different things, but I think about capitalism a lot. And I had this conversation a lot actually in grad school with fellow social workers that, you know, we all were like told, yeah, you're getting in this work, you're not going to make a lot of money, but it's the right kind of work to do. Right. And I always pushed back and I said, why? Like, why should we not demand more money, right? Why should all these folks doing this important work and serving people, helping people, not paid well, not compensated well? Too often, capitalism rewards folks that are doing good work in their field, but maybe harmful to people, right? Like, I think about like the CEOs of like soda companies, right? Yeah, that may taste good in the moment that I'm having a soda, but it's not good for my health overall. But those folks are profiting off of that, right? Like, so why shouldn't, if I'm good at my work and I'm taking care of folks and like actually helping people, what's wrong with me asking for, you know, not just a livable wage, but a wage that, you know, I can prosper off of and my generations that can come after me can prosper after. So like, you know, I'm not going to get into all the nuances of capitalism, one, because I'm not an expert, and two, I think we don't have that much time. But like, that's something that I think about a lot is like, if we're doing the work to actually care for folks, like why aren't we the ones compensated the most? When we're looking at comparatively those that are doing other work that aren't benefiting folks as much or potentially even harming folks, like that doesn't sit well with me and it never will sit well with me. And I hope it doesn't sit well with those folks that are tuning in right now. But, you know, wondering if anyone has anything you want to say about that. You know, sorry that I went there, but like, I was like, I felt like Dr. Reed just kind of set me up perfectly to chime in on this thought that I've had for a long time.
I love talking about capitalism because we need to dismantle that. Okay? Like that is the root. That's at the root of racial capitalism. That's at the root of everything we're dealing with now, right? That along with, you know, structural racism, institutional racism, and anti-Black racism, right? So I also won't deep dive too much, but I will say this, Anthony, to your point that folks who aren't doing this kind of work, right? Folks who actually do work that deals in harm and they get paid much more than home care workers ever would, right? And then home care workers devalued. At the root of that, I believe, is the divide and conquer tactic or technique, which those in power have, you know, used for centuries, right? They've always pitted certain groups against each other, and then they've given us an other to cast all of our hate towards and our anger towards and our problem towards, right? Someone we could blame. And so it's really a game of like the haves and the have-nots. Those who have money, who have privilege, who have power, you know, have been separated from those who do not have, right? And they have been made to believe that as long as they continue to vote in the interests of those in power and align with those in power, they'll be okay. And certain folks who are among those who have not, right, have also aligned themselves that way, pulling away from their own class, right? Pulling away from their own class to identify with the class that they're not in. And I think Bree Newsome did an excellent job. I wish I had the tweet with me right now, but she was talking about how we're all consumers unless we own, right? If we don't own, we're still consumers. So many of us are in fake class solidarity with the 1%. And capitalists, when we really need to be in solidarity with those who are in our class, right? So class solidarity is something I've been talking about often this year, because we would do well to build with and organize with those who are in our class, so that we can reach those, which I believe are attainable goals of receiving wages that are beneficial to us. No one should be receiving wages that allow us to barely make it. We need wages that are going to do exactly what you all said, provide a good future for us and our generations to come, and not have to worry about if we miss this one paycheck, how far it will set us behind. So if you ever want to talk about capitalism, Anthony, call me, because that is my jam. I love dissecting that. And it's a problem, and it's real, and it's something that we have to stop ignoring and dancing around. We got to talk about it. I mean, that's what fuels the prison industrial complex, right? The same thing that Progress Not Prisons is fighting with this campaign and zoning in on. We have expanded prisons. We have, bloated those budgets and bloated the budgets of police officers in our nation. And because of that, our communities have been on the opposite end of that. There's so much needed that has been stolen from us and put into these budgets. And I mean, if we just took, like you all say, that 1%, just 1%, how things would be so different here, and what that would look like for us and what that would look like for workers who deserve dignity, whose work is dignified. Like, I can't say that enough, because what a slap in the face it is to tell someone they're an essential worker and you won't give them what they need to protect themselves, but yet you gave them a designation of essential worker. How cruel. That is utterly cruel. But again, at the root of that, we know, is capitalism and all these other isms and things. So, yeah.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you. Yeah. We'll have a talk offline, I'm sure. So I wanted to use the last few minutes to see about some policies and things you all have worked on, and some nexuses, right? I know there's one bill I definitely wanted you all to talk about, but our connection, Kim, and my connection to UDW from my past job at AB 392, I know that you all had a direct link with your some of the people that you all represent, work with. Would love for you to share a little bit about that. And I think from what I know you're going to share, I want to highlight, the work CSJ was doing this year was really around trying to remove barriers to victims' compensation for victims of police violence. Too often, victims of police violence are, oftentimes, and not oftentimes actually, but too often their videos are shown all over Twitter and social media, and that pain is continually relived. It's modern day lynchings, but on the back end, we are not providing healing and trauma to those victims and to the communities, right? And actually, some of that is like in law that we are not going to provide services to these folks. So my organization was working with quite a few other great organizations and leaders to try to remove some of these barriers to victims' compensation. That was AB 767 by Senator Grayson and Senator Kamlager. The bill didn't make it this year, but we're going to keep working on this. We're going to keep working with the governor's office and Victims' Compensation Board to really remove stigma and barriers for all victims of violence. So wanted to highlight that, but wanted Kim, you to share a little bit about your work and UDW's connections to police violence, and then would love to hear a little bit about another bill. I know you all have the Crisis Act this year, so feel free, Dr. Reed and Kim, to just talk a little bit about the policy advocacy you all are doing in Sacramento.
So we do a lot of advocacy, obviously, because of some of the issues we've laid out here with home care workers being devalued in this state. And so we do a lot of advocacy around IHSS, but we also do advocacy around social justice as well. And so last year we came on to AB 392 as co-sponsors. For those of you who don't know, that was dealing with police use of force. And the conversation we brought to the team really was like highlighting the intersection of disabilities and police violence. So if you're not familiar, nearly 1/3 to half of all people killed by police are folks with disabilities and mental illness. And that spoke directly to us because that is who our members provide care for. They are caring overwhelmingly for people with disabilities, and many of those people are their own family members. And we want them to live. We want them to live their full lives. We want our members to live their full lives, and we never want them to walk out into this world fearing that, the police will gun down one of their family members because they are overly stimulated that day, right? And so they are perceived to be acting erratically, although, their home care provider knows how to de-escalate them. And so this actually played out in real life, unfortunately, in 2018 with our UDW member, Myra Mikulizio, and she was gunned down by Butte County Police Very shortly after they arrived on the scene, Myra had lived with schizophrenia. Her family knew that. They cared deeply about Myra. And anyone living with schizophrenia, that is not shameful. It's nothing to be, disappointed in or feel bad about. People living with mental illness deserve dignity and respect as well. And that's how they deserve to be treated, and to be treated with love and care. Unfortunately, she was experiencing a mental health crisis at the time. And two Butte County sheriffs shot her in the back. And so she's no longer here. And so we did not want that to ever happen to anyone else again. So that's why we came on as co-sponsors, and we fought hard for that bill. And we're very thankful to Hallie, Myra's daughter, who came down and worked that bill with us as well, because her mother's not here anymore. And that could have been changed. That did not have to be the case. There's no reason why Myra should be deceased. And quite honestly, had a clinician or a therapist responded on the scene to help talk with her and de-escalate her, she very well could still be alive today. So that's our investment. We don't want that to ever happen to anyone. And I don't want to speak for William, but I know that he shared with me an encounter that he's had before, and I'll allow William to share any more if he wants about, why we invest so deeply in, good legislation like that.
Well, to put it simple, UDWA invests in this type of legislation because we care. That's the bottom line. And we care for our 100,000 home care providers in our jurisdiction. A little investment in mental health goes a long ways. And even though, we go out, we batter the police, but in many cases, they're not equipped to help. And they're not educated on how to help. And you put them in that situation, and it is a room for disaster. My son, he ran away, and I was trying to find him. Well, when I got there, the police had threw him on the ground, put handcuffs on him. And when I intervened, because I know my son and I wanted to protect him, now you had two crises. You had police wanting to arrest me for interfering, but at the same time, they were trying to hurt my son, who does not have the ability to communicate for himself, does not have the ability to express what his concerns are. But because of their fear for him, and necessarily me as well, it was a very volatile situation. So it's that kind of thing. So we saw it recently on the news. You had a person with a mental illness crisis. And what did they do? They put a hood over his head, spit cover, and then they pushed his face to the ground. Well, here's a man in crisis. Here's a man who could possibly need some TLC, and what do we give him? We give him brutality. That is not the answer. So we're in this because we understand the crisis and the situation of many of our healthcare providers. We understand that sometimes we try to educate them, we try to train them, but we don't have the resources to do it, and the resources not provided for us to do it. UDWA run on membership dues, but we take part of that dues that we get to train home care providers. We take part of the dues we get to make sure that the people who do this kind of work are prepared to do it. So we have to go into our pockets to provide them and educate them with the protective equipment that should be supplied by the government. If they would take 1% or 0.5% and invest in people, invest in us, the world would be a better place. And as I started, UDWA invests because we care. And that's why we do it. But at the same time, we need more resources in order to be effective. We need more resources in order to do the job that is necessary. And that's our fight.
Yeah. And we're working hard, and we're going to keep working hard together to get those resources to the right place. I think, the last thing I wanted to end on, and this is another kind of policy thing, but I think, this conversation has been so enlightening and so powerful, but also, has been a little depressing at times because, we're talking about the lack of resources and what we have invested in. I'd love for you all to talk about, the tangible potential win that you all are going to have, we all are going to have collectively when Governor Newsom hopefully signs AB 2054 by Senator Kamlager, because I know this is a bill that you all worked on this year in coalition, and a way of reimagining safety, right? So would love for you to, as we wrap up right now, just to share a little bit about this bill and like how it contributes to this idea of shared safety, right? Which is a big thing my organization is all about. We all need to play a role and have responsibilities, and it's not just the role of cops or prosecutors to keep us safe, but it's all of our roles and jobs. So we'd love to have you share a little bit about this bill as we wrap up.
Definitely. I'm super excited about it, so might get a little giddy, but AB 2054 is the Crisis Act. And for those who don't know, all it would do is create a pilot grant program, to fund communities who have created these alternatives to policing and alternatives to like public safety that don't involve police. Meaning there are entities or groups, grassroots groups in the state who are responding to mental health crises, right? Who are responding to crises involving substance use, who are responding to DV situations, right? And they're doing it in a way that keeps the individual safe, that keeps them safe, and the community safe as a whole. But how can we envision this to be ongoing if there's no funding behind it? So that's what this bill does. It puts money into the right hands of the folks in responding to these kind of crises so that everyone stays safe at the end of the day. And that is public safety. And that's reimagining what safety looks like without involving police so that people can still live. And so I want to shout out Mental Health First, SAC. So they're in Sacramento. They are already on the ground responding to these crises, right? They get calls on a regular basis saying, somebody's in distress, and they show up. And so that is safety, and that's rooted in community. And that's something we should all be doing. I know out here, myself and several other trusted comrades have gotten together starting last year, and we've been talking about creating something for San Diego so that we can respond to these crises as well. And so right now, as it stands, many of us get the calls, but we just respond because we love our people, because we love our communities, but we don't have money to back us up to ensure that we can always do this. And so there are ways, and I want to share this, there are ways to create community safety wherever you are. For example, I go out and I meet my neighbors. I have conversations with them. I tell them about the work that I do. And I say to them, hey, if I'm ever in crisis or somebody in my home is ever in crisis, please don't call the police. Here are some numbers you can call of people that I trust who know how to de-escalate, right? One of my friends is a licensed therapist. Call her if there's an emergency here that doesn't involve actual violence, right? And that's how we work to keep each other safe. One of my neighbors has a child with a disability. So I know that if I ever see that child acting in a way that is not how they normally act, I know that I'm not going to engage that child by calling the police, but I'm going to implement the tools my neighbor gave me to help de-escalate their child. That's safety. That is rooted in community safety. So I really hope that the governor signs that bill. This bill is for Myra. This bill is for so many other people, Ezell Ford, all these other folks that were gunned down while they were experiencing mental health crises, where they actually should have been treated with love and care instead of guns and batons and bullets and all this other stuff. This bill's for them. And it's for our communities who love the people that they're living among and who desperately want to see them live their full lives, to be healthy, to still be here. And the last thing I want to add to that too, is that when we respond, we're facilitating people into care if they choose, right? So that eliminates a level of violence too, because we know that when the state responds, they will designate, you're going here, you're going to a psychiatric facility, or we're mandating that you go to treatment. And if someone didn't give consent, that's violence. But instead, we're working with the person to find out, hey, what do you need? Tell me who you trust, and we'll call that person right now to come down here, and we can talk through a safety plan with you. That is real work. That is also justice work. That work is rooted in love. It's rooted in radical love, really. That's caring for each other at its very core and keeping all of us safe. And we're doing it without the police because we know historically they can't do that. They cannot do that work. And nobody who is armed should be showing up to respond to individuals to de-escalate them. That just creates more escalation and, room for violence. And we want to divest from that. We want to keep everyone safe.
You touched on it actually when you were saying, this is like kind of shared safety, community safety. I was thinking, it's community love, it's community justice. This is it's a society that we all have responsibility for, and we're not just all watching. It's all of us participating and being active in. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you for the work on the bill. Bipartisan votes passed overwhelmingly the legislature, so tremendous work on that. So huge kudos. We were proud to support and just love the work that you all are doing and who you all are working for and raising up that dignity. As we close, I want to see Dr. Reed. Do you have anything else you'd like to share with us? Closing thoughts before we wrap it up. It's been an amazing conversation. So appreciate any last thoughts you have, Dr. Reed. Oh, you're on mute, Dr. Reed. Oh, now his camera's gone. Technology. We'll get you back, Dr. Reed. I think, yeah. Okay, there we go.
I just want to thank you for all the work you do, and I encourage everyone to join us, and together we can get this thing solved. But I think it's forums like this where we talk and communicate that we can solve problems. But again, thank you so much for having us on, and I thank you for all the hard work. Yeah, no, I mean, actually, you just brought up one last thing. Where's best can we find information about UDW and the work you all are doing? I know I follow Kim and UDW on Twitter, but where are the best ways to find out more information and get involved? Facebook is good. Just look us up on Facebook, and you can. We have 21 counties, and you can plug into any one of those counties and see what's going on in each one.
And www.udwa.org.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and listening to this important conversation with your hearts and your minds. Really, thank you, Kim and Dr. Reed, again, for the work that you all are doing. And to all your workers across the state and the country, thank you. Thank you for taking part in this conversation on why we need labor for Progress Not Prisons. You can go to progressnotprisons.com to find out more information and get involved. Check back in with us as we continue to tweet and post on social media about how we want to reallocate only 1%. I mean, we'd love to reallocate all of it, right? But we're just talking about reallocating just 1% of the $50 billion that California spends on its criminal justice system. So thank you again. Bless you all, and I hope you all have a great rest of your week.